Hi, everyone. This is Jenny, founder of the Newer School Psychologist. And today I am with Liz, who is, do you consider yourself a newer school psychologist
Yes,
still?
I do. I do.
Okay, cool, cool. Excellent. So she has been able to travel around a little bit around the state of California and do some interviewing in some different districts. So since she's had that capability of being able to do some different interviews, I thought she would be great to share some interview tips with all of you. So Liz, do you want to go ahead and formally introduce yourself and talk about how long you've been a school psychologist? And if you want to share where you've been working, anything like that.
Okay. I'm Liz. I've been a school psychologist for 4 years, not counting my internship. I have worked in 3 districts, 2 districts in Ventura County and 1 district in Fresno County. Before that, I was a teacher and an intervention specialist for about 18 years.
Awesome. Awesome. So I'm hoping that people from all over our fabulous nation are going to be able to watch this. So I know since your work and my work has been mainly in California. So this is just my disclaimer to anyone who's like, oh, we don't do that in our state. We're going to talk maybe about little California stuff here and there.
Mhm.
All right. So I'm curious, before you go in for the interview, what are some things that you do to prepare yourself? More, prepare yourself for the questions, prepare yourself for the interview in general. What are some of those things that you go through?
I think the first thing I do is I go look at the school district's website. And I get a feel for how many schools they have. Do they have K-5? Do they have separate junior highs, 6th through 8th grade? What programs they have? Do they have their own in-house special day classes? And then do they have low incidence programs? So that I can kind of speak to some of those areas, because if I know a district has, say, a deaf and hard of hearing program, and I may not know a lot about that type of assessment, I might want to kind of look into that and have some understanding. For example, also I'd look at, are they a PSW district or a discrepancy model district? Because I came from an area before I came to Ventura County that nobody did PSW in. Those were actually one of the reasons I came to Ventura County, is that was my area of interest. And just kind of looking at how their school district is structured. For example, I remember interviewing for a school district that had universal design, and I didn't even know what that was. And so I had to look up and find out that universal design means they don't have SDC classes that are separate. They don't have RSP classes that are separate. That's a collaborative model where the RSP teacher and the special day class teacher would be going in and working with the teacher to help those students. So that helped me prepare for the types of information I might cover there, and just kind of getting a feel for the district's philosophy, looking at that type of thing, just kind of, looking around, talking to anybody who might know the district too, and kind of getting an idea for their climate and culture, and just kind of knowing where you're going.
Okay. So that's great stuff. And some of that stuff we can see on websites. I know some school districts provide a lot more information on their websites than other ones do. So I love how you talked about, maybe reaching out to somebody who either works for the district or maybe even works nearby the district that, typically we kind of know about our neighbors and what's going on over there. What types of things do you do to prepare yourself for questions?
I like to go on the NASP and CASP websites and just kind of look at what current practices are being talked about. And especially as a new psychologist, kind of what are the hot button topics right now, and kind of refreshing, what is important to know about. And I think also just really getting down to understanding the core concepts of assessment, about RIOT, remembering RIOT, and which is the, review of records, interviews, observations, and and then testing is last, and remembering that that's the foundational piece, and to not worry about specific batteries or names of certain things, but just kind of understanding the underlying concept of what we're doing.
So I'm curious, I know sometimes just even reflecting back on early interviews that I had done, I'm just curious, like, are you someone who like jots down notes while you're thinking about it? Do you, like, I found myself sometimes like practicing while I was driving, like, okay, if they ask me this, and I like practice saying it out loud to kind of see what it like sounds like. Am I
Right.
stumbling over my words or things like that? Do you use any of those type of strategies?
I do like taking notes. That really helps me kind of like organize my thinking. Um, in the beginning, I really, because I didn't know what to expect, I didn't do a really good job of preparing. But as I kind of learned and figured it out, I found that if I kind of like, okay, they're going to get asked some assessment questions. So what are some foundational pieces and how would I talk about that? And I kind of plan out with bullets, about what are the important things I want to get across.
Mhm.
Because when I didn't do that, I would just talk, instead of, just being very concise. And I think one of the biggest things to plan for is when they ask you, tell me about yourself, is, what are the most important things you want them to hear, and how you can do that in a concise way that isn't too much information and not rambling, but organized. And I think that's probably the first thing I would do as a new psychologist, is really tighten up how you want to talk about yourself
Mhm.
and your, you know.
I know that a lot of people get nervous before interviews. So, what types of things do you do to help yourself before going into an interview? Are you doing mindfulness practices? What are you doing?
Do a lot of self-talk and reminders. I remind myself that I'm not expected to have the answer to everything. That it's okay to say, I don't know, but I know where to get that information, and kind of remind yourself that these are all human beings, and we're all here together. And I also tend to be an over talker. So I've kind of with a strategy so I don't over talk. So I might remind myself, okay, you need to count to 2 before you respond, so that you can give yourself a minute to gather, that and just give yourself grace that it's going to be um, scary the first couple times, you know.
Yeah. And I think, from the other side of the table, people expect people to be nervous, right? Like,
Right,
this
right.
is an important, new venture for somebody. These are important decisions that are being made.
Right, right.
So I'm curious, you've gotten to do some different interviews in different districts. Are there kind of typical questions you mentioned, you're going to be asked about assessment.
Right.
And definitely in California, that's a huge emphasis in our state here. Um,
Yeah.
and you talked about, tell me a little bit about yourself. I know that sometimes they'll say, can you bring your resume to life or something like that?
Mhm,
What are
mhm.
the kind of questions, like if you had to interview for a different district, at this time, what types of things would you kind of prepare yourself for?
Um, being able to talk about what represents a legally defensible report.
Mhm.
I think that's a really good piece to be knowledgeable about, given that be prepared to talk about child find. What is child find? What that means to you as a school psychologist. Um, I think that's important to prepare for. And I think again goes back to the RIOT, the underpinning of assessments
Mhm.
and the importance of all of those, aspects being brought to light. I would not cram the names of a million batteries. But I would be prepared you may get a question about what would be your standard battery for a specific learning disability assessment. And I would have at least that down cold, an idea of what you would use to assess a child for a specific learning disability, because that's your primary bread and butter piece of an assessment, that would be important. Trying to think of other things. Maybe being a little knowledgeable about SST process and the RTI pyramid, the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 interventions, kind of maybe you might be asked about what are some interventions you would recommend for a child who's struggling with reading, and kind of being able to talk about the first tier being universal and available to all students, second tier, and having just a little bit of an ability to talk about that, both on the social, emotional, and the academic side, so you could show.
I'm curious, with so many kids coming in, all across our nation into our schools with a lot of trauma in their background, we're seeing, huge spikes in kids with a lot of emotional concerns and things like that. I'm curious, are you finding that there's questions about, behavior and FBAs or, how to support kids who are struggling in that arena? Are you noticing some questions about that as well?
I have not received, I'm trying to think back. I believe I have had questions about what an FBA is and have you done FBAs, and what are the components of an FBA, and so I think that would be a good thing to study up on, and have some interventions you could recommend, because you may get a question, a teacher approaches you because they have a child who's having a hard time paying attention in class. What are some things you would recommend? And if you don't know the answer, say, I know I can refer to this resource, and this resource, and don't feel like you need to cram everything, every little detail in.
So that kind of leads me to my next question. I'm curious, have you ever been stumped in an interview, or, even if you haven't, what would be your response if someone asked you some out of the blue question that you were either you knew it, but you can't remember it because we're so nervous, or you actually just didn't know? What would kind of be your strategy for that?
I think I got stumped in the beginning about a couple different things. Low incidence disabilities and assessment of those students. I had no idea how you would assess these students. Or say when I had no preschool experience, and if I were asked, what would be part of a battery for assessing a preschooler, I think in the past I would say, oh, I had to know the answers, and I had to know all these names of all these batteries and all these different things. But now I kind of realize the correct answer is, that's an area of growth for me. I'd like to learn more about that. I know that I can go to this site, I can go to this resource, maybe be a little knowledgeable about the Diagnostic Center gives amazing preschool assessment trainings, and show an interest in learning and growing, and not be embarrassed that you don't have the most perfect answer. But I think they're looking to see, are you willing to learn, and grow as a psychologist.
So for anyone outside of California, diagnostic centers are, I think, pretty specific to our state, and they are a wonderful resource. So if anyone's listening to this from California, definitely take a look at some of their resources there. Okay, so last question. Any tips you would have for someone who's interviewing in the next couple months for a school psych position?
I think the biggest tip is to use active listening. Pay attention to what questions they're asking you, because that's going to tell you where their interests lie, what's important to them, what they feel you need to have for the position, and don't be afraid to ask questions. There's nothing wrong with asking questions, and don't be afraid to say, I don't know, but I want to learn more, or I'm interested. And I think if you get kind of a question that feels a little sticky, they're asking you something that doesn't have a cut and dried answer, to really say, I'd look to my district's climate and culture and our practices within the district for how to address that situation, because it shows that you have the ability to follow um, and be able to follow their climate and culture. And you're not coming in as the person who knows everything, that's
Mhm.
going to fix everything, but just really be prepared to listen to what's being said in the interview.
I've always kind of had that same sense where, like, if every question is about assessment, I'm like, they're not going to ask me to do counseling in this
Yeah,
district.
right.
When they start asking me about counseling and interventions and assessment, you're like, oh, okay, so this is a little bit more, well-rounded kind of,
Right.
job position. So yeah,
Right.
I always say, listen for their questions, like you said, because, if they start asking you questions, I know I've been asked in the past about like organizational strategies and different things like that. I'm like, oh, they need someone who's like on the ball. They want to make sure this
Right.
person's
Right.
got these skills to move forward.
Right.
But I love what you said about like looking to, the district's climate and culture, or being able to say, I'm not quite sure what that would be, but I would, obviously reach out to district personnel if I didn't
Mhm.
have that answer, to see if we already have a process and procedure in place in
Right.
this arena. It's a great way to be like, I know you guys are here to help me, right?
Mhm.
Awesome, awesome. Anything else that you want to share?
Find a mentor. Find an experienced school psychologist that you can talk to. I was very fortunate that I had a mentor for 2 years, and it was invaluable. And so I highly recommend you seek that opportunity, because in our job, we get asked to speak on a lot of different topics. There's no way you can come out of your program knowing everything, and just really be open to every professional development opportunity you get. That to the day you die, you will keep learning. You will never know everything in this profession, because it changes and grows, and the needs and the what kids needed 20 years ago when I started in the educational field are very different than the needs of children today. And just being very open to learning and growing.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I hope everyone appreciated this. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and reach out. Happy to follow up with you guys. Thank you, guys.